the Law of One Breakdown channel. Have you ever wondered what the raw material actually says about Jesus, free will, sexuality, and even hair? Each week we go straight to the original sessions and explore one topic through the pure wisdom of the Law of One. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this subject. Let's begin.
Hello, in this episode, I'm going to be talking about logos. What is logos? What's sublogos? What's sublogos? And so on and so forth. It can be kind of confusing because Ra uses the word logos in a few different kinds of references, and I'll explain that now. So I made this little slide up, and logos, most of the time, and I'll get into that in a minute, most of the time, Ra is referring to the galactic core, okay, as logos, the central sun, if you will. And I'll have some of the sessions that they talk about that. Not very many. This is going to be just a short introduction to logos because I'm working on the archetypes in reference to the Egyptian tarot, and logos comes up a lot. And I thought, gosh, if someone doesn't know what logos is in reference to how it's taught in the Law of One, then it's going to be extremely confusing. So I thought I'd just do a little quick video about the logos. So in most cases, Ra's talking about the galactic core, okay? And the galactic core is at the center of our known whatever this universe. And we have this whole big thing with this central sun. And as we go spiraling towards the central sun or the galactic core, that's how the different densities change. And I do have some videos on the densities, which explains all that. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but the closer a planetary sphere or a bunch of folks gets to the galactic core, the higher the density. And the higher the density, eventually you get to 7th density, and then 8th is this mysterious density that kind of turns back on itself into the first density, but it's the next logos with its own new set of rules. Okay, so logos, galactic core. Sublogos is, in this case, our sun, or any planetary sphere's sun. Their solar sun. Sublogos, again, in reference to our solar system, are the planets, Earth being included in that. And then sublogos are people, like human beings on planet Earth, but that would also be for other planets in other galaxies that have other kinds of living things in them, and consciousnesses, and people in and of themselves. And so each logos, again, the massive thing that is all things that we know in this physical type of existence. In this particular logos, they set it up with a free will aspect. And the free will actually brought about the polarities. And so this is how this logos is set up. And so all the other universes, the Milky Way, this universe, that universe, all the different areas and the arms of this big grand thing churning towards the galactic core all deal with free will. And I have a session, which I'll read in a minute, where Ra talks about how they became wanderers or star seeds to other universes, or whatever you want to call the big kahuna. I think universe is probably the good, not galaxy, but universe. And how weird it was because it was set up totally different. Because Ra and the Ra folks, the social memory complex known as Ra, they are also in our solar system. They originated from Venus, and Venus is now in the 6th density. And I've been chewing on this for a while. It's like, well, how come it's 6th density and Earth in this part of space is only just now getting into 4th density? Well, in the last, quite a few years now, but how'd that work? Well, way back when when Earth was going through its probably first density, because that's billions and billions of years, first and second density, Venus was going through its different densities ahead of ours. And at that particular part in this universe, we were further away from the galactic core. And so every planet has their own time frame of when they go through these densities. And that's also why they look like they're barren planets to us with our eyes the way they are, set the way they're set, because fourth density through seventh density chooses to be invisible to third density. And it has to do with the choice and all these other things. Okay, so getting back to Logos. So this is, generally speaking, how it's referred to in the Law of One. Now, that being said, Ra has also described it this way, that the galactic core, the central sun, is called the primal or the first Logos, and that our sun is Logos, and that the planets are sub-Logos, and that the folks are sub-Logos. That happens sometimes too. There was a little bit of an inconsistency, but predominantly speaking, the first slide I showed you with Logos and then our sun is sub-Logos, and then the planets are sub-Logos, and then the entities or beings are sub-Logos. But just in case you start reading through the Law of One and all of a sudden it changes on you, that's why. Also, there is the fact that Logos also means love. And so Dawn, I think I made this slide up. Dawn basically asks about our planet, and is it considered a sub-Logos? Ra describes Logos in a whole different new way, and I'll get to that slide in a minute. And basically we have to remember that this is called space-time, and there's a slide for space-time, and it's our incarnative aspect, if you will, of existence. And then there's time-space, which is where our souls, our consciousness goes to in between the space-time iterations. And so Logos has a lot to do with that as well. And so let's just get to the slides now, but I just wanted to give you a visual. I'll put the original back on real quick. This is predominantly how it's stated in the Law of One. Okay, in section 25.5, Dawn asks, then our sun is a sub-Logos of the Logos, that is the major galactic Logos, correct? And Ra says, this is correct. And remember, galactic, solar systems, universe, everybody kind of has their own way of looking at these things. And so when Dawn asked major galactic Logos, I would probably have thought of it more as the major universe, because the Milky Way galaxy is a galactic, thing too. So anyway, it's just nomenclature, but for the most part, we'll just leave it at that. Okay, in session 29.4, Dawn asks, what I'm saying is there are roughly 250 billion stars or suns, something like that, in the major galaxy. Are they all part of the same sub-Logos? And Ra says, they are all part of the same Logos. Your solar system, as you would call it, is a manifestation somewhat and slightly different due to its presence of a sub-Logos. Okay, and so Logos, generally speaking, is the galactic core, the central sun. Sub-Logos is our sun within our solar system. In session 29.9, Dawn asks, then the planet which we walk upon here would be some form of sub-Logos? Is that correct? And Ra says, a planetary entity is so named only as Logos if it is working in harmonic fashion with entities or mind-body-spirit complexes upon its surface or within its electromagnetic field. So this is the confusing part of Logos, because now Ra is saying that Earth, if it were such a way, which it's not, there's too much strife here for Earth in and of itself, in its own consciousness, to be working with us intricately, That's why there's volcanoes and this and that. And Ra has said as much as well. So bottom line is, if we had the capacity to actually work with Earth and live harmoniously in love, there wouldn't be any volcanoes, earthquakes. Everything would be copacetic with each other because it would all be done in love. And in that case, Ra's saying that they would call Earth Logos. There's a book called We the Arcturians, which I really resonated with. It was also a channeled work, and it was really interesting. And they said that their planet and them, the Arcturians, they had that kind of situation. And they said, we didn't have these explosions on our planet, i.e. volcanoes, and we didn't have these shakings and breaking of the crust. We just didn't have any of that. Okay, and so their planet, as far as the higher density folks look at it, would be called a logos, because remember, logos also means love. So it's a little confusing, but I threw this in there just to show you how logos can also be used. Okay, and in session 29.13, Ra says the logos creates all densities. Again, we're talking about the galactic core. Okay. However, we shall state the logos does create both the space-time densities and the accompanying time-space densities. That's why this great central sun, and as we progress as social member complexes or individually through the densities, in seventh density, eventually we hit some kind of spiritual mass with, gazillions of others. And you according to Ra, you go outside of time, even outside of space. That's why the galactic core, sometimes I'm like, well, what is it really? But it looks like for this particular universe, if you will, or the big thing, I believe it was NASA that I got this from. It's, of course, not a real picture. It's a representation of what they believe this whole thing that we're involved in, with all the branches and the arms and all the little galaxies and all the solar systems within each galaxy. This is what it looks like. And I have a little tiny story at the end of how I sort of had this interesting experience that reminded me a lot of this picture. So, the logos, the central sun, whatever that is, I think it's the foothold between, or maybe the portal. I don't know. Maybe there's not a word that exists here of what it is truly, but it is space-time and time-space, I believe, at the same time, because it creates both the densities, all the densities in space-time, and it also creates all the densities or the levels in time-space. And I threw this session in because I thought it was really cool. Okay, session 90.17. Dawn asks, is Ra familiar with the archetypical mind of some other logos that is not the same as the one we experience? And let me give you a little sidebar here. I thought I made that slide, but I guess I didn't. But they said that every logos makes up their, whatever you want to call the big thing, with a certain set of rules, both mathematical and everything else. And one of the rules in this one is free will. And there's other creations via the logos of, multiple gazillions of life forms that are completely different than that. And so that's what Dawn was asking. And Ra said, there are entities of Ra which have served as far wanderers or starseeds, okay, to those of another logos. The experience has been one which staggers the intellectual and intuitive capacities, for each logos sets up an experiment enough at variances from all others, that the subtleties of the archetypical mind of another logos are most murky in the resonating mind, body, and spirit complexes of this logos. So different creations with all the universes and the solar systems and all the teemings of life, they get set up in different ways. And someday, we'll all be in the tail end of seventh density, moving into eighth, and create our own. So that is all I have for slides. And the last thing I was going to share was I went to have a hypnosis session for spiritual reasons. And I had these questions that I was trying to get answered, all spiritual in nature and whatnot. And I did. I had a really cool experience. But at one point, I found my consciousness, literally. It seemed like I was out in space and I was going through what seemed like some kind of like maybe a wormhole or a tunnel. Anyway, and I was going so fast. And I experienced this with my, my consciousness. And I was going and going. And then finally I hit something. Like I wasn't in a body, but I still had the capacity to feel, if you will. And I kind of hit something. And I had this sense that it was sort of like I hit the edge of something. And then one of my, I don't know, I guess I would call it a guide. It shows up once in a while when I'm having these crazy experiences, said, let me back up. So what I saw when I stopped at this barrier, if you will, was nothing. It reminded me of like outer space, like what I felt like I was in a little bit before that I could see distant stars and planets and stuff, but there was nothing there. It was sort of like space before anything's there. So anyway, this guide, I say little because it's in the form of a child's voice, and it's been there a few times when I've had these kind of profound experiences. But he said, "See, isn't creation more interesting?" And then I had this other whole experience, and then I was zapped back and da-da-da-da-da. I'm not going to get into all the details because I don't want to share all the spiritual details of my life. But bottom line is when I saw this, and this is the latest representation that they have of what they think our galactic core and all the arms spinning around it and everything else. And it struck me that it kind of reminds me of that experience I had. It could be completely unrelated, but those outer edges, I don't know why it would be blue, but it was sort of like a light gray. It wasn't black, like pitch black, like you think space would. It was more of a grayish, maybe it was like that kind of, but there was nothing there. So maybe that's where the next logo starts when the next octave gets created. But I don't know. That's just me speculating. So anyway, hopefully this is less confusing about the logos and you understand a little bit more. It can get confusing when you're reading the Law of One because there is a little bit of inconsistency and you have to sort of read between the lines sometimes. Oh, Ra's talking about more like time, space, and the spiritual side of logos, not the physical side of logos, i.e. the central sun. So anyway, that gives you a little intro to logos. And this will be followed by a few videos on the archetypes of the mind via the Egyptian tarot. Okay, as always, I hope everyone's well and take care, everybody.